In the quiet town of Eldridge, where the trees whispered ancient secrets and the mist clung to the ground like a living shroud, lived a young woman named Lydia. She had just moved into an old Victorian house that she inherited from a distant relative. The house was beautiful but bore a foreboding atmosphere. Lydia was excited but also nervous as she unpacked the last of her boxes. Little did she know that the house had been waiting for her. The evening began to fall, and Lydia settled into her new home. She noticed something odd about the place: a collection of old, dusty books in the attic and a series of strange markings etched into the wooden floorboards. She shrugged it off as eccentricities of the old house and went about her evening. As night deepened, Lydia prepared for bed, unaware of the malevolent presence lurking in the shadows. Her dreams were restless and fragmented. She found herself wandering through a misty, dilapidated version of her house, hearing whispers that seemed to echo from all directions. She tried to call out but found no voice. Suddenly she was jolted awake by a loud bang downstairs. Heart pounding, Lydia crept out of bed and made her way to the source of the noise. As she descended the staircase, she felt an icy chill crawl up her spine. The old grandfather clock in the hallway struck midnight. Lydia noticed something strange: the time was always stuck at midnight. In the living room, the furniture was in disarray as if someone had been searching through it in a hurry. Lydia felt a cold draft and saw a shadow dart across the wall. She turned quickly but found nothing there. Her anxiety grew, but she was determined to investigate further. Returning to the attic the next day, Lydia began to research the books she had found. Among them was a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with cryptic symbols and disturbing drawings. One entry stood out, detailing the story of a previous resident, a man driven mad by nightmares that seemed to bleed into reality. The last entry hinted that the house itself was a trap, designed to ensnare those who dared to uncover its secrets. As Lydia read, she began to feel the same sense of dread she had experienced in her dreams. The walls seemed to close in on her, and the shadows grew darker and more menacing. She could no longer distinguish between her waking hours and the nightmares that plagued her sleep. Each night, the horrors grew more intense, and she found herself unable to escape the house's oppressive grip. One particularly terrifying night, Lydia awoke to find herself not in her bed, but in the middle of the attic, surrounded by the very symbols she had read about. The whispers from her dreams became voices angry and insistent. She felt an unseen presence drawing closer, its malevolence almost tangible. Desperate for answers, Lydia returned to the journal and found a final, hastily scrawled entry to end the nightmare. One must confront the darkness within with no other options. Lydia ventured into the attic, confronting her fears and the evil that lurked in the house. She felt a surge of determination, battling the shadows and the echoes of the past. In a climactic confrontation, Lydia faced the entity that had tormented her. She used the knowledge from the journal to confront the darkness directly, breaking the cycle of nightmares that had entrapped her. The house seemed to exhale a sigh of relief as the malevolent force was dispelled. Exhausted but triumphant, Lydia emerged from the attic as dawn's first light filtered through the windows. The house, once a prison of fear, now felt lighter, its oppressive atmosphere lifted. Lydia had survived the horrors of Nightmare's End and had reclaimed her home. With the house's dark history behind her, Lydia was ready to start anew. She knew the scars of her ordeal would never fully disappear, but she had faced the darkness and emerged victorious. Lydia's days were increasingly consumed by a gnawing sense of dread. The once charming Victorian house now felt like a dark labyrinth, each room more unsettling than the last. Her nights were plagued by increasingly vivid nightmares, where she wandered through a twisted version of her home, the walls closing in and shadows reaching out to her. The line between sleep and reality blurred, leaving her exhausted and on edge. One particularly chilling evening, Lydia discovered a hidden compartment in the attic behind a loose brick. Inside was a dusty, ornate box with an intricate lock. The box seemed to pulse with a dark energy, and as she opened it, she found an old, ornate key and a series of faded photographs. The photographs depicted previous occupants of the house, each one marked by an expression of sheer terror. The final photograph showed a family, their faces frozen in a haunting scream, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and resignation. As Lydia examined the key, she found that it fit an old door in the basement that she had never noticed before. That night, she resolved to unlock the door, driven by a mix of curiosity and desperation to end the nightmare that had consumed her life. The basement was cold and damp, with an oppressive silence that seemed to press down on her as she approached the door. The old door creaked open, revealing a hidden room filled with strange artifacts and symbols that glowed faintly in the darkness. In the center of the room stood an ancient altar, covered in dark stains and strange runic markings. The air was thick with a palpable sense of malevolence, and Lydia felt as though she was being watched by unseen eyes. As Lydia investigated the altar, she discovered a journal similar to the one she had found earlier, but this one was much older and more elaborate. The entries described a dark ritual performed by the original owner of the house, a man obsessed with achieving immortality by binding his soul to the house. The ritual had gone horribly wrong, trapping his spirit and condemning the house to be a prison for any future occupants. A chilling realization dawned on Lydia. The house was not just a structure but a sentient entity, feeding off the fear and despair of those who lived in it. The nightmares she experienced were manifestations of the trapped spirit's anguish and the house's malevolent intent. To break free, she needed to confront the spirit and destroy the altar. With newfound resolve, Lydia prepared for the confrontation. She gathered items from the room, including a ceremonial dagger and an old, silver amulet inscribed with protective symbols. As she descended into the hidden room once more, she felt a surge of cold air and heard whispers that seemed to come from all directions. Standing before the altar, Lydia began the ritual described in the journal, using the ceremonial dagger to dismantle the runic symbols and the amulet to ward off the dark presence. The air crackled with dark energy as the spirit grew agitated, its form taking shape in the shadows. Lydia's hands shook, but she pressed on, reciting the ancient incantations with determination. The confrontation reached its peak as the spirit materialized fully, its face twisted in eternal torment. Lydia fought to maintain her focus, knowing that any mistake could cost her life. With a final, forceful strike, she shattered the altar and completed the ritual. A blinding light filled the room as the dark energy dissipated, and the oppressive weight lifted from the house. Exhausted but victorious, Lydia emerged from the basement as dawn's first light began to filter through the windows. The house, now cleansed of its dark past, felt lighter and more welcoming. The nightmares that had plagued her ceased, and she could finally sleep peacefully. The experience had left her deeply changed, but she had reclaimed her home and her sanity. Lydia decided to stay in the house, now free from its dark history. She had faced her fears and conquered the nightmare that had haunted her. The Victorian house, once a prison of terror, had become a symbol of resilience and hope. As she settled into her new life, she knew that she would always remember the harrowing journey of Nightmare's End.